makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
So, in the 24 hours since I made my last video on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, things have escalated. Not only has Russia recognized the independence of the two separatist regions in the Donbass, but they have apparently now sent a, quote, peacekeeping force to keep the peace in those two regions. This is basically an invasion. There are Russian troops now inside Ukrainian territory because no one aside from Russia recognizes the independence of those two regions. And not only that, Putin has further warned that this conflict will not be resolved not only if Ukraine decides to abandon its intention of joining NATO, but now turns out Putin wants Ukraine to be entirely demilitarized, which is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Anyway, um, yeah, so they decided to dispatch troops to perform peacekeeping duties. A friendly reminder that if ever the US sent peacekeeping troops to a war zone, everyone on the left would be saying that's invasion, that's aggression, that is war. Okay, so there's a complete double standard in what the anti-war left will permit countries like Russia to do, and what terminology, what euphemisms they will use to do exactly the same shit that Western imperialists do. But that is apparently okay. So, yeah. So those are the two self-proclaimed, the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republic, which no one aside from Russia recognizes. Now, let's look at the map just in case you need a reminder and here, this is why this is very problematic. So we see from the map that Donetsk and Luhansk are two separate regions that you can very clearly see. The Russian separatist-controlled parts of those, however, are not the entire regions. There's only a certain part. Now, apparently, the proclamation of independence from these two regions considers the entire region as theirs. So they're not just proclaiming the independence of the territory they hold. They're proclaiming the independence of the entire region. So that would include, for example, the city of Mariupol, which is currently controlled by Ukraine. So why is this problematic? Well, if Russia says that it wants to enforce the independence of these two regions, then it very well might be referring to all of this, not just the part that they already control. So this is a massive escalation. And it basically allows Putin to continue expanding his presence in this area. And, you know, if they cross into this territory, I mean, presumably you would expect the Ukrainian army to respond, as they should, as any country who is defending its own sovereignty has the absolute right to do. Now, the call for Ukraine to be demilitarized is incredibly terrifying because, A, this would only be achieved through war. There is no way that Ukraine will voluntarily demilitarize, so it would have to be a natural outcome of Russia crushing it through war, which I'm sure will give every single tankie a hard-on. But for the rest of us who actually prefer countries to be sovereign and have their territory respected, a position that I think should be universal among the left, this is completely unacceptable. There is no country that doesn't deserve to have means to defend themselves. And, you know, as I've always argued, if I'm not a fan of NATO. I don't think that NATO should have existed after the Cold War. I don't think it serves a purpose. Although, ironically, everything that Russia has been doing since 2008 and 2014 kind of gives NATO a reason for existing. So that's the ultimate of ironies. But if we consider the period before that, I mean, NATO should have been disbanded, you know, along with the Warsaw Pact at the time. There was no reason for it to continue existing. If the US wanted to maintain, you know, bilateral alliances with countries like Britain or Germany, etc., you know, fine. That's in their right to do so. But I don't think NATO needed to exist. Having said that, not only did it not need to exist, it clearly didn't need to expand either. But the flip side of this is that the countries that have joined NATO since have joined voluntarily. This was not NATO twisting the arms of Poland and the Czech Republic and Romania to join. This was these countries that felt it was in their interest to join NATO, and you have to respect that choice as well, for many reasons. Perhaps they felt safer. Perhaps they wanted. One of the main reasons why a lot of these countries have joined NATO is because they wanted to modernize their armed forces along NATO lines. So, whatever the reason, they have a right to do so. Any country has the right to establish whatever alliance you think is necessary, they think is necessary to maintain their own security, and Ukraine has that right as well. So, yeah, that is what is really concerning. If Russia decides to enforce the letter of the independence treaties and assume that the entire Donetsk and Luhansk regions should be independent, then really nothing is stopping them from moving their army more to the west, and if necessary, invade all of Ukraine if they dare oppose Putin. So this is bad. This is very bad. And like I said, the demilitarization bit is further escalation, because now Putin is demanding things that he wasn't demanding before. And I really, at this point, like anyone who was arguing that NATO was being irresponsible by talking tough against Russia and all that. True, there was an element of brinkmanship that is always verging on irresponsible. I think NATO, the problem with NATO is that it should have made very clear what it intended to do from the very beginning, and not play this game of, are we going to do sanctions? Are we not going to do sanctions? Are we going to move troops? Are we not going to move troops? Just be fucking clear what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. Set very clear tripwires of what you're going to expect and what you're not going to expect, and see what Russia does. But anyway, yeah, this escalation on Russia's part in the last couple of days is well beyond any form of brinkmanship or aggression that anyone has ascribed to NATO over the past couple of months. I'm sorry, this goes well beyond the realm of what is acceptable. So I'm sorry. I've said it from the very beginning. There is one ground aggressor in this conflict, and it is Russia. And if you don't accept that salient fact, you should not be in the business of discussing foreign policy, because your mind is so fucking warped by this idea that imperialism can only happen if the West does it. Aggression can only happen if the West does it. And so we should give a blank check from every other authoritarian state that feels the need to do whatever it wants against its own people, against its neighbors. Doesn't matter. It's okay just because they're not the West. And therefore, by definition, in the minds of these dumbass tankies, is fine. It's not imperialism. I'm sorry. You're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. Anyway, let's look at some of the stupider takes on Twitter that I've seen since then. So here is... so this is what drives me crazy. So this is a video of people in the separatist regions celebrating the fact that they are now, quote, independent. Remember, this is the reason that why I'm so passionate about this is because this is exactly what happened in Texas back in the 1830s, when we, and when I say we, I mean Mexico, allowed American settlers to go into Texas. And eventually there was a critical mass of American-born Texans who decided that they wanted independence. And they wanted independence so that they could eventually join the U.S. And turn Texas into a slave state. That's really what they wanted, because Mexico did not have slavery. That was the reason why they wanted independence. So all of this brings echoes of that to me. And this is why I find it absolutely unacceptable that you just allow any group of people to decide, yeah, we just want independence because we have some sort of foreign policy interest that obeys no real like historical tie. Because the problem is, if you accept that the self-determination of the Russian-speaking peoples of the Donbass, the people who are making this case are the same people who are arguing that Ukraine is not a real country. So you gotta be kidding me. What is your principle here? What are you arguing? Why doesn't Ukraine have the right to exist in its current form? But somehow these two separatist regions, which had no like previous history of a separatist movement before 2014, suddenly their claim is entirely legitimate, but Ukraine's claim to its territorial sovereignty isn't. I mean, this is fucking hypocritical as hell. But we're dealing with people who clearly need Olympics level mental gymnastics to reconcile the hypocrisy that they have on how they treat each side of this conflict. Anyway, more. Ben Burgis, who has been on a roll of really bad Ukraine-Russia takes. Ukrainian far-right nationalists aren't the Nazis marching on Stalingrad. Putin sending troops to the breakaway republics isn't Hitler annexing the Sudetenland. A mind-blowing point, I know, but seriously, maybe sometimes things happen in the world that aren't World War II again. Well, that is really funny because Russia already annexed, as I mentioned in my reply tweet, a big chunk of Ukraine under the same exact premise that Hitler took the Sudetenland. That was the excuse of why Hitler wanted the Sudetenland, because it was primarily German-speaking. It's the exact same parallel. I'm sorry you might not like it, but that's the fact. And then you have this dipshit, which I had a long exchange with. Not that Crimea is really comparable to the Sudetenland anyway. Russia already had a vital naval base there, so they didn't even need to invade. They just needed to not leave. Look at how your brain gets fucked up and you resort to these kind of arguments. You resort to having to reinvent the term invasion, which it clearly was. Anytime you take over territory belonging to another state and you do it by force, that's called an invasion. That's called an annexation. It's illegal under international law. So this is ridiculous. This is a ridiculous argument. This is basically, and this is what I replied to him, I'm not going to go through the whole conversation. Well, since the US already has a base in Guantanamo, does this mean that the US can basically take over Cuba and then just say, wait, we had a base there. What's stopping us from taking the rest of the island? No, of course. This guy would obviously be the first to decry that as imperialism. How dare the US invade Cuba? Which it has done in the past, by the way. So, complete double standard in how these dipshits define the terms. When Russia does it, then when the West does it. And also this point, Crimea was transferred from Russia to Ukrainian SSR in the 50s. Yeah, that is true. But you know what happened before that? The part that they conveniently forget to mention is that Crimea was originally settled by the Tartars, who were then expelled from Crimea in the numerous decades before this. So the only reason that Crimea became Russian-speaking is because they kicked the Tartars out in like the century before it was retransferred. So give me a fucking break. It's funny how history just begins here in the convenient part where it benefits your argument. Jesus Christ. Anyway, here is David Griscom, who was formerly of the Michael Brooks show. Being anti-fucking war should be the most basic position. Insane and so depressing that this is hard. This is such a vacuous statement, like absolutely meaningless statement. What does it mean to be anti-war when a country has already invaded another? When a country has already violated treaties? What does it mean to be anti-war? I'm against what? Be specific. How can you be anti-war when one of the sides is actively seeking war. This is like saying, well, I'm anti-war on August 31st, 1939. Yeah, I'm anti-war. Germany should not invade Poland. I'm anti-war. Then what? How does this translate into avoiding war? How does the statement, I'm anti-war, avoid war? It doesn't. It's completely meaningless. And really, what leftists should be is not anti-war in just this vague, idealized, or rather abstract notion of what war is. Leftists should be anti-aggression. Leftists should be anti-intervention. Leftists should be pro-sovereignty of states. And if another state decides to invade you, well, that state has a right to self-defense. And if that state requires allies to do it, guess what? It also has the right. And here's what's so fucking stupid about comments like this. The US is not going to move a muscle for Ukraine. Not a single American soldier is going to die for Ukraine. That's a fact. And the fact is, if the US really wanted to go to war over Ukraine, you would have already seen entire divisions deployed to Europe. You would have seen entire fighter wings deployed to bases around Russia. You would have seen bombers being mobilized. You would have seen fleets being mobilized. You would have had carrier battle groups mobilized and outside Russian waters if the US really wanted war. The US does not want to fight a war with Russia. That's an absolute fact. So that makes this comment of being anti-war even more fucking idiotic. Because you know very well that the US is not going to move a muscle for it. Anyway, that is depressing. On the other hand, we have a few dumbass leftists who have apparently realized a bit of the error of their ways. And here is Kyle Kulinski finally calling a spade by doing a video that actually says Russia invades Ukraine. Remember, this is a guy who said literally Ukraine is not a real country and had been playing down invasion concerns and who had been, overhyping the supposed aggression on the US and NATO side. So finally he realizes, what is really going on. And some of the replies here are hilarious because, again, Fiorella Isabel. His brain will explode. He's only repeating what so-and-so said. He has zero clue to what is actually happening. This is Fiorella Anti-Vax Isabel, one of the stupider members of the dumb left and that Jimmy Dore orbit. Then we have another one, Socialist MMA, of the formerly known Fred Hampton leftist. Now I have no idea what they are, but they're a bunch of dumbasses. BreadTube serves imperialism. Wow. Look, 459 idiots like this tweet. Jesus Christ. And then Hassan, who at least was honest. I was wrong. The Russian recognition of Eastern Ukrainian territory as independent and the subsequent Russian troop activity into said regions for peacekeeping is 100% an aggressive escalation that absolutely moves away from diplomatic talks, a horrible move. Okay, fine. He recognized that. He still made a bunch of other really stupid takes, like the ones I mentioned in my previous video, of saying that Hitler's annexation of Austria wasn't the real problem. Yeah, it kind of was. But anyway, I don't know what else to say because as you can tell by the tone of my voice in these last two videos, I've been incredibly frustrated about the attitude taken by a lot of this so-called anti-war left. And I'll be honest, I've always fucking hated the anti-war left. There has always been something about the anti-war left community that has really, really rubbed me the wrong way. And it's exactly this. This is what I see. This is every single suspicion that I had about them from the very beginning materialized. These people aren't anti-war. You're anti-American. That's all it is. That's all it is. That's what the worldview is. You're anti-American, anti-West. You're not anti-imperialism because you're okay with other countries doing imperialism insofar as they are anti-West. You're okay with war insofar as these wars serve the interest of countries that are anti-West. You're not authoritarian because you're fully in support of every authoritarian despot in this world insofar as they are anti-West. That is what you are. You are anti-West. You're not anti-war. It's a complete misnomer. And using all this euphemistic rhetoric, uh, like Griscom using here, like that should be our most basic position. No, this is meaningless. This is meaningless. Being anti-war is meaningless. So I don't know. I definitely think that this might be like yet another rift among the online left, just like Force the Vote was. Like here we're gonna see who is really consistent about their principles of standing up against authoritarian states, who is consistent in their principles against aggression, and who is consistent about supporting the sovereignty of nations. Because it's clear that when it comes to Russia, all of these become exceptions to the rule. And in fact, this rule only seems to apply when a Western country does it. So yeah, I'm sorry. The anti-war left is full of shit. I'll be honest. I don't care. Hate me, unfollow me, unsubscribe. I don't give a shit. But the people who are in this kind of mindset, you're not real leftist. You're not. I mean, you can't make exceptions to the behavior of countries like Russia in any way. In any way. So, yeah, there we go. This is really frustrating. And you know what's worse? I'm still not 100% convinced that there will be a war. I do think that Putin is very much willing to absolutely destroy Ukraine. He will have no problem whatsoever in wanting to do that. Destroy, humiliate, bomb the shit, kill their leaders. Or send them to fucking gulags. I don't know. I'm sure he's capable of all of that and willing to do all that. Having said that, he's not dumb enough to know that there aren't consequences, economic consequences, political consequences. I'm not sure the entire Russian people want a war. So, there are big downsides if Russia decides to do what it's willing to do. So I'm not 100% convinced that there still will be a full-scale war. But even then, the situation that we have now is just completely unacceptable. There is no way that this status quo is acceptable in any way, or any status quo that develops from here is acceptable in any way. But anyway, if there is a war, and if you start seeing Russian, indiscriminate bombings, human rights abuses, people, photos of children dead on the streets, as we did during Iraq, as we did during Afghanistan, as we've seen in every war that the U.S. has launched over its entire history, for that matter. When you start seeing those photos, a lot of leftists are gonna really, really, really feel like shit, because they have been implicitly supporting this. And there are a few, I think, who will be sensible enough to realize that this was not what they're arguing, what they believed they were not arguing for, and will, show some genuine regret for the positions taken. To some extent, the way Kyle and Hassan have so far, when they realize that this thing about about Putin being a fucking deranged aggressor actually turns out to be true. They will realize that their position on being anti-war in the face of whatever human rights calamity follows, it's going to be really tough to swallow. It's going to be really tough to reconcile. But a significant amount of these people will find more mental gymnastics to justify this, and they will continue to use the whataboutism. But Iraq, 200,000 civilians dead. And, the body count will pile up and they won't care. Because insofar as the US has done worse at any point, then apparently this is all okay. And you know what? Fuck those people. Fuck those people. You're not leftist, okay? Fuck off to the right where you belong with the neocons. Because I'm old enough to remember the debates over the Iraq war on the internet at the time. There wasn't social media, but there were forums, and everyone was fighting over this, left and right. And the arguments that I hear from people now defending Russia are exactly, they're bringing echoes of what I would hear from the fucking neocon supporters. I'm against Russian aggression, but, I mean, that but is the exact same as like, I'm not a racist, but, I wouldn't want to invade Iraq, but Al Qaeda is supporting them. I have no evidence for this, but but it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. So once again, fuck these people. Fuck these people. They're not leftist. On that note, if you like this video, please like, please share, especially to your tanky and Putin-loving friends. And please subscribe to this channel for more hot takes like this. And I will see you next time. And please, if you really are a leftist, stand by your principles, stand by your values. Imperialism is bad, regardless of which country does it. Aggression is bad, regardless of which country does it. Stand by those principles.